Hello everyone, welcome back to our next session on Kubernetes Pod. So in this session, I am going to explain few of the basic questions on the pod. If you want to get more information on these top 10 pod questions, watch this video till the end. If you have any queries, feel free to add in the comment section. Let's get started with that. So what is the first question? The first question, is pod is immutable? If yes, explain. So what is the meaning of immutable? Immutable in the sense, for example, if you have the pod is deployed into the Kubernetes cluster, say, for example, I have a pod and inside the pod, my application container is running, that is container C, and the container C is inside the pod. So this is present inside the Kubernetes cluster. So inside the Kubernetes cluster, your pod and container is there. Can I update this pod? If any issues occurs to this pod, can I update? The answer is no. We can't update any pods inside the cluster. You can't fix any issue. If it is there, you can't log in and fix it. Just rather, you can replace this complete pod with the new pod. You can only replace this complete pod with the new pod and the container. That's why we are telling the pod is immutable. We can't modify the pod. Rather, we always make the new pod. We will always replace with the old one with the new pod. That's why we're telling as a pod is an immutable. So let us go to the next question. The next question is, what is horizontal scaling? Say when you say when the application is inside the Kubernetes cluster, if the pod and container are running inside the Kubernetes cluster, what we can do, if the based upon the demand of the users, we can increase the copies of the pods. You can increase these copies from 1 to if existing pod is 1, you can increase to 5 or you can increase to 10 based upon the demand of the users. So you can increase the pod copies. So pod copies with the same container, right? So these pods count can be increased. You can scale it up. That's why you calling as a name as scaling. We are scaling up the pods. So this scaling, we call it as a horizontal scaling, because horizontal scaling, the name indicates, it says there is unlimited. We can do based upon the demand, how many pods you can increase. But in single pod, you can't increase the same container multiple times. That is not the case, that you can't increase the multiple containers inside the pod with the same container, you can't increase. Right? Rather, we can only increase the pod. That's why we call it as a horizontal scaling of the pod. Let us go to the next question. Okay, the next question is on where pods get scheduled, worker node or the control plane. In the previous session on the Kubernetes architecture, we have seen there are two things, main nodes, like two machines. One is worker node machine and control plane. So where pods get scheduled, always the pods always get scheduled in a worker node, not control plane. Okay, always pods will be running inside a worker node only. The next question, write a command to get pod. So how do you get the pod? What is the command you use to get the pod? So the simple command, we will use the kubectl as a command line tool, get pods. Get pods. This will give the information of the pod. So here one pod is running. So this is the command we will use. Kubectl get pods is the command to get the pods. The next question, can you explain 4 top level resources of the manifest file? So what is the manifest file? Manifest file which we are using to deploy our pod to the Kubernetes cluster. So if I see there are 4 main resources are having the pod. The pod is having one resource, as API version is one resource, kind is one resource, and the metadata is one resource, and spec is one resource. So what is the use of kind? I'll go with the kind first. So what is the kind means? The kind, it shows the what kind of object you are creating. So here I am creating a pod object. What is the object we are creating here? We are creating a pod object. So if it is a deployment, we'll mention the deployment object like that. So here, so my object is pod. So that defines the object, which object you are creating. What is the API version? So whenever you are creating a pod object, when we are creating a pod object, so we are telling Kubernetes to consider the v1 schema to create a pod object. That's why we have the API version. API version, it defines the version of the schema. We are telling v1 schema you used while creation of the pod object. What is the metadata? Metadata information, it defines, there are different, if you want to declare anything inside the pod, for example, name is nothing but if you want, we want to give the name to our pod. You can't, if you are not providing any name, you can't access from the Kubernetes cluster. So that's why we are defining name of the pod. What is the name of the pod here? Angular pod is our name of the pod. And we have another labels, like another option labels we will mention. So this label, it will help us to loosely couple with other objects, like other objects. For example, if you have the deployment and the pod, it will be loosely coupled based upon this label information is a very important. And the next one, we have the spec information. What is the spec information? This spec we also called as a template of the pod. So what is this spec? Is nothing but all the containers we will define here. Maybe here it's when here I have only one container, right? So here I have only one container. That's why we are calling it a single container pod. So inside a spec, if you define one more container here in the next line, so that will call it a multi-container pod. So here we are having only one container. So the spec resource is mainly useful for the defining the container information. Either it will be the single container or the multi-containers. With the we will also define the container pods there itself. Let us go to the next question. I hope these 4 top level resources are very important in the manifest file. So I hope that is 4 main resources are clear. Now, any 2 uses of manifest file. What are the 2 uses of main manifest file? Say, for example, manifest file is very important, we can say, but see, where, for example, in the project, in your team, if the new joiners are coming or new employees are joining, that time you can just share this manifest file to the developer or new joinees. They will go through that manifest file, and with that they will easily understand what kind of containers we are using, what kind of ports we are using, what is the what are the resources, container names, everything they will understand with the manifest file itself. And also another main use of manifest file is there may be a gap between the deployment team and the development team. So that gap can be cleared with the manifest file, because whatever the developers are requirements are there, they will define in the manifest file. We can give the manifest file to the developers. They can define their containers and all, which image they want to use. That's another advantage of manifest file. And next question, how do you deploy pod to the cluster using the manifest file? So on the next question, which command you will use to deploy the pod to the cluster? Say now I have this manifest file. With this manifest file, I can easily deploy my pod to the Kubernetes cluster. I'll just copy the path. I'll go to the command prompt. Now here, if you see, there are one pod is running. Let me delete this pod. What is the command we'll use to delete the pod? kubectl delete pod, and this pod name I will use. So what this will do, this will delete the pod. So now when you see the get kubectl get pods, it will definitely say there are no resources are found because I have deleted the pod. So now how you will create the pod with this manifest file? This is the manifest file. I have to copy the path of the manifest file. So the command is kubectl apply -f. This is the command path. When I see this kubectl, see now the Kubernetes pod is created. So this is the command we use to create the Kubernetes pod. So the next question is, how do you introspect the running pod? Say, for example, your pod is running. What you want, you may be required to introspect. So what is happening inside the pod? For that, we have 2 things. Okay, one is you can use hyphen o, there is two commands we have, okay, hyphen o uh, wide and or hyphen o AML file. We'll just see practically how to do that. kubectl get pods and the pod name, whatever the pod you created, the pod name hyphen o wide. So this will display the one line information of the pod. If you want detailed information of the pod, the command what you can use is kubectl get pods and pod name, and here hyphen o, and you need to mention AML. So what this will do, it will fetch all the complete information of the pod from the Kubernetes cluster, and it will show. See here it is showing what is the API version you used for that pod, this pod, and it will showing the what is the kind and metadata information, annotations, and all the content, what container image you are using, image pool policy, this everything, all the information it will give from the Kubernetes cluster, from where it is, as we already these are the information, like this pod information we are when it is pod is got created, this complete information will get stored in the Kubernetes cluster, it will be stored. Okay, cluster store. So usually you should remember the name cluster store. This pod information is stored in the cluster store. Coming to the next question, we have done with how do you introspect the running pod. There is another option also we have. You can use the describe the pod, that will give you the complete details of the running pod. Okay, so that will define you the what is the actual state of the pod and what is the uh, desired state. So how do you get the logs? The next question, you can say the command you can use kubectl logs, and you need to mention the pod name. This will show you the logs information. So say for example, if the pod is having the multiple containers, how which container log it will show. So if you're not mentioning any container information here, this will show you the default first container. So if you're not mentioning any container name, the whatever the first container is available inside the pod, that it will take and it will display those logs. You can mention, if you want, you can mention the container, and you can mention the container name here, that then it will display the particular container logs, it will display. So the coming to the next question, I think it's a last question. How do you log into the running container? Say when the container is running, how do you log into the container, and you can you can see the your application related information, or in the container events or environment variables, if you want to see how you will do that. So you can use kubectl exec hyphen it, and you mention the pod name and sh. So this will take you to inside the container. Say here, I have not mentioned any container name here. Just I am logging with exec hyphen it and pod information. This will log into the first container. If you mention the container name, it will log to that particular container name. I am not mentioning any container name here, so it is logging into the first container. Say now if I want to get environment variable of the container, so it will show all the environment variables of that particular container. So how this container, like host name and all, it is coming. See, if you see what is the host name of the container, it is a Ketaki Angular pod. That means if you see the what is the container name we have given here. See container name, example container we have given. But here host name, what host name it is showing? It is showing Ketaki Angular pod is the host name. What is here? Ketaki Angular pod is a pod name, right? So that means by default container will take pod host name only. See whatever the pod host name, what is a pod network information, annotation, whatever the pod properties are there, everything is given shared with the container. That's why you are seeing here when you see the env and host name, you are getting the pod name only. So pod name, pod host name will be shared to the all containers which are inside the container. So I think we have covered all 10 questions which we have planned for today's session. If you have any doubts or any feedback, you can feel free to share it in the comment section, and I will share all these 10 answers in the description of the video. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you.